Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
Welcome back to MacBreak Studio. We're looking at motion again with Mark Spencer, and we're kind of doing a series called, I'm kind of colloquially referring to as Back to the Basics. We're covering keyframing and copying, pasting keyframes, and now we're going to look at keyframes versus behaviors, and when you'd use one versus the other.
Yeah, I mostly wanted to talk, we've had a few episodes on keyframes, and if you've never used motion before, you might think that's the only way to animate, but there's this whole other world of behaviors which are extremely powerful ways of creating animation without any keyframes at all.
That's great, kind of like artificial intelligence built into the app.
Yeah, it's a way of just having animation happen that you can adjust. And sometimes it's for the right thing in the right place, it's excellent. So I really wanted to come back to our basketball idea that we've been exploring and say, okay, we saw how to animate that with keyframes. What if you wanted to use behaviors? Like kind of where does it work and where does it not work? And this also kind of brings home the point, one thing I mentioned, I've mentioned a lot actually, is that behaviors are often good for ongoing animation. Not all the time, but often you can think of them as stuff that you want to continue to unfold rather than starting and stopping. So we have our trusty basketball, and if I play, there's absolutely nothing happening right here at all. Right. In fact, I'm going to reset I hit Option X, which extends our play range to the whole 10 seconds of the project so we can see the whole project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the library, and I'm going to go to behaviors. Okay, so you can see up here, library and behaviors. And we have a whole bunch, over 200 different behaviors for animating all kinds of things, audio and cameras and motion tracking and particles, and it's just great. So, but I want to focus right now at first is on this category called simulations that kind of simulate physical phenomenon, physics. Right. Okay, so we have all these kind of interesting things in here. I'm going to use gravity because I want the ball to bounce. Right. So the ball's got to go down, and gravity is going to make it go down. So I'm just going to drag that behavior onto the ball. You could also drag it right into the layers list there. It shows up, and we get a red animation path. And right away, if I play...
Straight down to Hades does the basketball go.
Yeah, on down. It just goes right down very slowly on its way. So that's, okay, then we can't use that. So the whole idea is you got to be able to tweak things, right?
Right.
So I'm going to bring up the Heads-Up Display. I press the F7 key. You could also click this little button in the toolbar to bring up the HUD or the Heads-Up Display.
I'm sorry to intersect. Does D work anymore for the HUD?
It works to rotate through different parameters. Okay. So Steve was asking about earlier versions of motion. There's a letter D. The HUD used to have a different name.
It did.
So, but the D key, if I press it while the HUD is active, will rotate through the different things that are selectable.
That's cool.
So anyway, the acceleration now is 30, maybe that's 30 pixels per second or something. It's not fast enough. So what I'm going to do is crank that all the way up to 100, and it's still
pretty slow.
Pretty slow, yeah. So the basic rule here is if you can't get done what you want to get done in the heads-up display, head over to the inspector.
Because the heads-up display is just a subset of what's in the inspector.
Yeah, yeah. And not only that's true, but here it's like, oh, there's the same thing. Acceleration, that's all there is, and the slider only goes to 100. But the key is if you drag right on that value field, you can go
much higher,
as high as you want. So I'm going to go up to like 1,000, okay? And now that ball is a little more interesting. In fact, I better stop playback because I'm going to hit Command Option O to set a play range out point just so we can see. So that's getting a little, I like that more. That's getting, I don't have time to wait for this.
Seems like it's changing its speed over the course of time. It feels like it's...
Well, it's gravity. It's accelerating. Yeah, exactly. It's accelerating. This isn't just like moving in a linear velocity at a fixed rate. It's accelerating, absolutely.
Hence acceleration slider.
Hence acceleration, yeah. So I've really cranked that amount up a lot. So that's great, but of course it just drops off the screen,
right?
Which isn't what we want. So if we go back to the library to these simulation behaviors, there's one called edge collision. And by the way, if you want to know what these do, the names are pretty explanatory, but if you select one, this little preview will show what it does, and you get a little description. So edge collision, I'm going to drag onto the basketball. I'll drag it in the layers list this time, and now it bounces.
What is it? What edge is it colliding with?
Well, that's a great question. Edge collision, what edge? Yeah. So the answer is it's the edge of the screen. In fact, if I stop, you'll notice as it goes down, it bounces right when this board, let me zoom in, this frame,
box.
That's the original graphic. Right. That's the size of the original graphic with the transparent areas. When that hits let me tap through it, the very edge of the screen.
I see.
It bounces. So in fact, if I had this rotated, check this out, like that, and now I step through.
It's going to use the corner to bounce from.
Yeah, it uses the corner to bounce from.
That's useful knowledge.
Yeah.
It's useful to know that.
Yeah, so let me undo that. So you can adjust that though. There's a few ways. One is there's some height and depth parameters here. So if I crank down the height, check out, see how the animation path is moving up now?
Yes.
So now it's not bouncing off the bottom. That's one way. Another way for you advanced motion users out there is if you make your project 3D, your edges are actually form a 3D box. So you can manipulate the walls and the side of that box.
So if I wear 3D glasses, it'll look like real?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Let's say so. So we're getting a little closer. Right. It's a bouncing, no keyframes, right? And it's just happily bouncing as long as we want it to go. It'll go forever.
Hence the,
ongoing animation.
Ongoing animation.
Which there's a way to do it with keyframes where you can say, hey, repeat these keyframes forever. It's easy to do with keyframes, but this is even easier. So it's bouncing, but it's just straight up and down, right? We want it to be. This pass is not this guy standing there dribbling, like, dude, pass the ball.
Right.
So we're going to use that. Hey, let's use this one. Actually, I need to go to the basic motion category here. In the basic motion category,
I'm not going to say that you're going to make a motion path from that. I'm not going to say that at all.
I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use one called throw.
That makes sense.
I want to throw the ball, right?
The ball.
Yeah, I want to throw the ball. So I'm going to drag throw onto the basketball. Okay. And in the heads-up display, I get this cool little interface, and I'm just going to drag to the right there, out pretty far, and now the ball flies off to the right and bounces. And by the way, now I've got these 3 different behaviors, and I can select each one to adjust them, or as you mentioned, I can tap the D key to roll through them. So if I go back to edge collision, the bounce, in fact, let's just turn throw off for a minute so we see what's going on. Edge collision bounce strength is 100%, which means it's doing something that doesn't happen in real life, right? If you actually had something you could bounce up as high as it started from, you'd have a perpetual motion machine, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's crank that down. We want to do something a little more realistic. So I'll have it bounce and gets a little lower each time. Okay, so see how it's kind of getting lower each time? Mm-hmm. So now if I turn the throw back on, you can see that bounce path kind of happening as it unfolds. So it goes over, boom, boom, boom. Moves to the right, hits the right edge of the screen, and keeps going.
Seems like the bounces should get slower in height every.
Well, it is getting lower now every time. It's getting lower and lower and lower. In fact, if I reduce that gravity more to make it more obvious, you can. Oh, I didn't want to mess with the acceleration. Sorry, I wanted to take the edge collision and have the bounce strength. Now you can really see the motion path is getting lower and lower and lower.
Sweet.
But it is bouncing against that right edge. So what we could do is let's go to the inspector, to the behaviors tab here that has all of these guys, all of these behaviors, and we don't want it to bounce against the left or the right or the top, just the bottom. In fact, back and front are really for 3D, but I'll turn those off as well. So now it bounces and it'll just bounce right out the door, right? So it's kind of getting there. Yeah. I'm going to set a shorter. I remember we had it before. It just went like this. We wanted one bounce and we wanted it to stop. So I'm going to set a play range out point about there because I'm trying to mimic what we did with keyframes, which is one bounce and stop. So now I'm just sort of forcing it to stop by having the playhead loop there. 2 more things we want it to do if we want to have it match the keyframes. One thing, do you remember what we did to it before? With keyframes. What other things we animated about it?
We animated the rotation.
Yes, so we had it spin. So guess what? There's a behavior called spin.
Nice.
Yeah, so let's throw that guy onto the basketball.
All right.
And we'll use this heads-up display. I'm just going to drag around here.
See, it seems like working with behaviors is way more fun than keyframes.
Yeah, kind of. It's interactive. And this is a nice thing about motion. I'm playing back and watching this thing unfold as I design it. Yeah, it's kind of like the video game version of building motion graphics. And it's just intuitive and reactive, and I can just watch this thing unfold, and now it's spinning. And now there's another one in the same basic motion category called grow shrink. So I'll drag that on here, and I'll drag it on a corner so it's proportional.
If it's coming at us like a bounce pass, it'll get bigger.
And by the way, it's like, hey, I can't make it go bigger. I want it to grow bigger. That's what this zoom slider down here is for. If I zoom in or out, I guess I'm as far as I can go on that. Let's see. Bring this in. Yeah, I'm actually already zoomed out. That's as big as I'm able to make it go here. But once again, I'll go to the inspector where I can make this happier. So grow shrink, scale to, and I'll just drag and really make this obvious that it's getting bigger. So it's very obvious. Okay. Oh, and by the way, part of the reason is taking the full 10 seconds to get bigger. So if I were to trim this grow shrink to right here, then
when you say trim,
wham! Yeah, I just hit O. Sorry, I just hit O to trim the out point of this behavior, so it only lasts. Now it's growing up. It's finishing by the end of this behavior, which is much shorter now, and it's growing to 600%, which is a little bit crazy. So let me scale back that down to something more reasonable, and now we can kind of see we've got a very similar animation to what we had before.
Sure.
Here's the problem. So here's that grow shrink stops. So what happens after we get to the end of that grow shrink?
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah, it just reverted back to its original scale.
Yeah. Some of these behaviors, if you trim them because you want them to stop, it'll revert back to its original scale. So there's ways around that, but it's a little bit of a pain in the neck. The other thing is I want this animation to stop. I want the motion of it to stop. Let me move the grow shrink out so we don't see it stop. But I want this ball to stop right there.
Right.
And there is a way to do it with a behavior. If we go back to the library and we go back to simulations, there's one called drag. So I can put some drag on that basketball. And again, I'm going to trim, but I want the drag to start about here, about when the basketball is at the apex of its after its first bounce trajectory. Yeah. So I'm going to tap I because I want this. You can also drag to trim, but I want the drag to start right there. And you may notice these other animation lines got smaller because now it's slowing down its forward momentum, but not by much. So I'm going to crank this way up, and now you can see it slowed it down a lot, but not enough. So once again, I got to go to the inspector and really crank up that drag amount, and I'm going to crank it up a lot more to make that kind of disappear. The thing is, it's stopping its forward momentum, but gravity is still having an effect.
Yeah.
So you see things are starting to get a little complicated now. So like, oh, okay, so I need to go to gravity, and I want gravity to stop there. So I'm going to trim O for gravity, and now it stops and stays right there. Oh, but it's still growing. So now I got to trim the grow shrink that I didn't trim before, and now it stops, but so now I'm starting to run in. I'm starting to like, okay, forget it. I'm going to keyframe. Right? So if you do just want a bouncing ball to do a lot and have a lot of balls bouncing around, make particles of balls, it's great. These behaviors are great. But as soon as you want something to stop or start from scratch, it gets a little more complicated. In this case, I think keyframes are actually easier to do a very specific animation that we want. We want one bounce and we want it to stop right here.
Right.
But this gives you some idea of the variety of behaviors that are out there if you've never used behaviors and want to start playing around with them.
Excellent. So I like your timeline there because it's kind of like staggered. But I can see how it can start to get fairly complex quickly with behaviors.
But it's neat how you can just keep adding them on top and adjusting them in real time.
If you're interested in learning motion from scratch, Mark has an excellent tutorial, Ripple Training, Motion 5 Fast Forward, and we have specific tutorials on using the camera and particles, all the things which you refer to. Want to check it out, rippletraining.com, and look forward to the next thing you're showing us in your ongoing Back to the Basics motion series. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching another episode of MacBreak Studio.